Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the invisible forces that literally shape our daily reality. We're talking about cognitive distortions, those sneaky, habitual thinking errors that kind of warp how we see the world. We're going to unpack a really practical, evidence-based toolkit to help you rewire your thinking. And it doesn't matter if you're navigating a high-stakes career, trying to close sales deals, or just figuring out how to build healthier relationships at home. So let me ask you, ever notice a tiny typo in an email right after you hit send and immediately spiral into believing your entire career is completely ruined? Or, I don't know, maybe your partner is a little quiet at dinner and your brain instantly screams, "They want to break up with me?" Well, if so, you are definitely not alone. Your brain isn't broken, actually. It's really just using a super outdated psychological defense mechanism. Okay, here's our agenda for today. We're going to start with the anatomy of irrational thoughts, then hit imposter syndrome at work, move on to sales psychology and rejection, look at couples conflict and relational systems, and wrap it all up with the cognitive restructuring toolkit. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Anatomy of irrational thoughts. Foundations and etiology. So where exactly do these self-defeating narratives even come from? Because they definitely don't just appear out of nowhere. To figure that out, it really helps to look back at the foundation of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It's fascinating how these habitual thinking patterns were initially spotted by psychiatrist Aaron Beck way back in 1963. He called them processing errors. Then, a bit later in 1979, David Burns expanded on that list. He created this incredibly practical vocabulary that actually allowed everyday people to identify and correct these automated mental mistakes. Now, the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that cognitive disorders are habitual, automatic, and systematically skewed thinking patterns. But what's truly mind-blowing is that their origins are non-evolutionary. They develop purely as psychological coping mechanisms in response to life experiences, maybe chronic stress or unmet emotional needs. Think of them as rigid, outdated psychological defenses our minds build just to navigate stress. They act kind of like internal filters that warp incoming data so it fits a pre-existing self-defeating core belief. Let's actually see how this plays out in everyday life. These classic examples from early CBT literature show just how incredibly predictable these errors are. Take all-or-nothing thinking. A young woman eats a single spoonful of ice cream, decides her entire diet is blown, and then just eats the whole quart. Or the salesman who spots bird dung on his car windshield and instantly overgeneralizes it as this endless personal pattern of defeat. And then you have the gifted pianist governed by rigid should statements. She makes one minor error, gets completely disgusted, and abandons practice for days. The main takeaway? These aren't intellectual failures at all. They are just predictable processing errors we make when we're under acute stress. Moving on to Section 2, Imposter Syndrome at Work, Feedback Anxiety and Threat Detection. Let's zoom in on the workplace for a minute to explore how these abstract cognitive errors show up in our professional lives. Just look at this massive number. Up to 70% of professionals experience imposter syndrome. And get this, that includes historical high achievers like Albert Einstein and Maya Angelou. They experienced persistent internalized self-doubt and a chronic fear of being exposed as an intellectual fraud, which completely proves that objective success, promotions, accolades, none of that actually cures internal self-doubt. In fact, senior leaders often experience even higher rates of imposter feelings than junior employees, simply because the perceived stakes are higher. So why does this happen? Well, it really comes down to neurochemistry. When professional stakes rise, your brain's threat circuitry, specifically the amygdala, kicks into high gear. This actually biases your cognitive processing strictly toward error detection. You essentially get stuck in a chronic scan-for-danger mindset. That makes you hypersensitive to potential mistakes while actively ignoring or disqualifying your positive achievements. Like, you might chalk up a major promotion to just pure luck, while viewing a minor spelling error as a literal career-ending disaster. To dismantle this whole cycle, organizations teach a technique called Socratic disputation. It sounds fancy, but it just means you literally put the distorted thought on trial. Let's say the trigger is receiving constructive feedback. The automatic distorted thought, which is driven by catastrophizing and mind reading, screams, "My manager knows I'm a fraud and is going to fire me." But when we stop and dispute it, we find the hard evidence against it. Like, wait, my manager gave me a high rating last quarter. Then we replace it with a balanced, growth-oriented reframe. Feedback is just a standard mechanism to improve work, not a character attack. See? It grounds you right back in objective reality. All right, Section 3, Sales Psychology and Rejection, Commercial Bottlenecks. Moving into the commercial domain, we really start to see how cognitive distortions act as a severe bottleneck by totally amplifying the fear of rejection. In sales, cognitive biases like the negativity bias or the ostrich effect, where Erectus completely avoids calling a difficult prospect, absolutely kill pipelines. This simple but super powerful ABC model from CBGT shows us the exact anatomy of this freeze response. A is the activating event. A prospect abruptly rejects a pitch. C is the consequence. The rep feels panic and just stops calling altogether. But the real magic happens at B, the beliefs. The belief sitting right in the middle, saying, I am terrible at sales and I'm going to lose my job, is what actually dictates that emotional consequence. It's not the rejection itself causing the panic, right? It's the seller's distorted internal belief about what that rejection actually means. To overcome this intense fear, sales teams can use something called gamification framing. This was heavily inspired by Jason Comley's rejection therapy. Comley was a freelance IT tech who actually overcame his own chronic avoidance by actively asking strangers for chewing gum or rides, purposely seeking out rejection. By doing that, you desensitize yourself to the word no. Sales teams can even play a 30-day rejection tally game, literally rewarding the person who gets the most no's. It's brilliant because it transforms a rejection from a painful personal failure into a positive metric of courageous activity. Section 4. Couples conflict and relational systems, the living room dynamics. Now, let's step away from the office for a bit and head into the living room, where interpersonal relationships turn into these incredibly complex systems of feedback loops. Marital psychologist John Gottman identified 4 highly destructive patterns, things like criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling, that actually predict relationship breakdown with over 90% accuracy. Let's look closely at criticism. This is fueled by the distortion of labeling and overgeneralization. It's attacking your partner's core character by saying stuff like, you never help or you are always selfish. But we can use a CBT antidote here, the softened startup. Instead of attacking, you simply state a neutral observation, express how you feel using I statements, and make a direct request. For example, the dishes are piling up, I feel overwhelmed, and I need some help tonight. It completely neutralizes the threat. Pretty powerful, right? And you have to look at this incredible metric regarding those subtle attempts at interaction, what Gottman calls bids for connection. A bid could literally just be a sigh, a touch, or a casual comment. Partners can turn toward, turn away, or turn against these bids. Couples who turn toward each other's bids 86% of the time report relationship satisfaction 5 times higher than those who only do so 33% of the time. Every time you turn toward a bid, you are effectively building a robust emotional bank account that buffers the entire relationship against stress. Which brings us to Section 5, the Cognitive Restructuring Toolkit, the 5-area CBT model. Okay, so we know what the problem is, we understand the neuroscience behind it, and we've seen where it happens in our lives. So, how do we actually fix it? This methodological protocol gives you a straightforward linear framework to intercept an automatic negative thought. Step 1. Catch the sudden emotion. Just notice the anxiety or the anger bubbling up. Step 2. Identify the automatic narrative running through your head and actually write it down. Step 3. Label the distortion. Are you mind reading, catastrophizing? Step 4. Put the thought on trial by really examining the objective facts for and against it. And finally, Step 5. Construct a balanced reframe and take an active step forward. Doing this literally pulls you right out of your panicked amygdala and puts you back into your logical brain. On top of that formal framework, leaning into some daily, evidence-based self-help strategies can systematically retrain your brain's automatic threat response over time. First off, consciously remove absolute terms like always, never, or must from your vocabulary. Perform a quick cost-benefit analysis of your beliefs. Ask yourself, is this coping mechanism actually serving my growth right now? Make sure you label a specific behavior rather than attaching a global, negative label to an entire person. And actively combat that mental filtering by searching for 3 positive aspects, or even just small wins every single day. This quote from researcher Carol Dweck perfectly captures the ultimate goal of cognitive restructuring, viewing ourselves as a work in progress. Because when we stop demanding absolute perfection and start labeling events factually, we transform challenges from catastrophic threats into simple, everyday opportunities for learning. Ultimately, it's all about giving yourself the grace and the compassion to grow. So, as you head back into your professional challenges, your sales calls, and your relational systems at home, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. What habitual, self-defeating narrative are you ready to finally put on trial today? Take a moment, catch the thought, check the evidence, and change the outcome. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.